Hello, Alkalites, and welcome back to Afterplague. I'm very happy to be back this weekend, and I'm working on some branding stuff for my Twitch channel, actually. I figured if I have to make it anyway, I might as well get some free content out of it, right? So I am making, as you can see, a stream starting soon screen. I'm also maybe going to use this for my stream ending screen with some minor changes, making the rat sleeping instead of moving around. So basically, I started out thumbnailing, that's what you saw right at the beginning, and then I basically photo bashed together a whole bunch of reference images and sketched from there. The centerpiece of this illustration is this big, elaborate painting frame, and it took me forever. I'm talking about hours, but I am incredibly happy with how it turned out. I truly think it looks like very elaborate, very ornate, I think is the word I'm looking for. Just, it gives you a fancy vibe. And of course, as is sort of a theme with my channel and a lot of the things that I make, I decided to sprinkle in some skulls all around this illustration. Obviously, you have the main skull on the photo frame, but you also have little hidden skulls on all four corners of the frame. You have the skull with the candle dripping down on it. I'm a firm believer in the memento mori of it all. I've always enjoyed skeletons and death motifs in art and media. Basically, what I really wanted to do with this illustration is make it look as fancy and elaborate as I possibly could. So you see these like big thick curtains with the gold tassels, the ornate candelabra. All of it is just like as much line art as I can possibly cram into this illustration. I'm going to, because I feel like that really adds to the ornateness, the fanciness, the expensiveness of everything. Is the texture in the line art, I think, really brings forth that feeling. So I did spend a lot of time on that. It's something that took me quite a while. Also, you might notice that, especially with the rats, that there's some overlapping line art that I don't erase, and that's because I want this screen to be animated. And I animate this way a lot. I'm not sure if it's like a janky way to animate, I have no idea, but I think it's called 2D rigging. I think I tend to 2D rig my objects and animate them from there. So I'll show you that actually later on. Surprise, there's a part 2 to this video where I animate the screen. I don't know if that's in the title yet, but you know, if you didn't know, now you know. So I started on coloring this frame. This also took a very long time because I wanted to make it look metallic, but not necessarily straight up gold. So I was trying to get that like painted metallic look, which it was it was such a challenge. Luckily, the frame is symmetrical both vertically and horizontally, so I could just do it once and then copy it across with some slight changes. I added in this like orange burnishing to try and add some contrast because it wasn't quite looking contrasted enough for me. And later on I decided that this like bright gold is not necessarily what I want, so I do tone it down to a more orangish gold rather than like pure yellow, and I like that a lot better. I do think this turned out very well. I like the shading on it, I like the lighting on it, and again, I really think it leans into that whole, I can't, ostentatious. Like, I'm running out of words to say to mean fancy, but that's basically what I mean, is this big ostentatious frame, almost too much, you know, excess. So again, I did these like big, thick, dark red curtains, and I did them with this really bright purple shading, which I love to use on these illustrations. You might notice it in my banner as well. The rat in my banner is shaded with a bright blue. I find it really contrasts well with these darker colors, is to use a really saturated shadow color. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it looks gorgeous. I did the gold tassels because I think that adds to the ornateness of it all. And you might also notice that the tassels are separate pieces as well, because those are also going to be animated. And I colored in the line art for everything so that it looks a little bit more painterly, I guess. This is one of my favorite life hacks. Find an alpha texture online, like a black and white texture, and do an overlay layer on whatever you want. I do it for the wallpaper, I did it for the desk for that wood texture so I didn't have to draw it by hand, and I later do it for the leather texture of the plague mask. Do it. Cheat. Be a cheater. I'm serious. Like, photo bashing, taking alpha textures from the internet, I'm serious about doing that because it really does improve the speed of your art. And there is something to be said about being a fast artist, especially if you're a commercial artist like I am. Speed, absolutely vital. Unfortunately, I did make a mistake with the table here. I forgot that the tails were going to be moving on the rats, so I didn't draw the table behind them, which is an issue because then there would be a gap, but I do go back and fix it. This plague mask, I decided to do white. I am actually working on a VTuber. I want to learn how to make VTubers, and I would like to use one as well, and that VTuber has a white plague mask, so I'm including it in this illustration. And of course, I also just tried to add whatever I think would be suited on this sort of study desk. So like a quill and an inkwell, some big thick books, and then this candelabra, which I decided to not make gold so that it stood out from the golden frame in the background. I'm not sure if I love that idea, but I do think it made it stand out. So it works for me. I colored in the skull, as you can see. And I thought about making the eye holes black, but I actually don't think that looks too well when you're trying to go for a more realistic looking face. They probably could be a little darker, but in real life, skulls don't just have black holes, you know, they have bone in there that you can see, so I tried to emulate that. I also colored in the pages of the books, and now I decided to give this book on the bottom a little bit of gold binding, just because I'm trying to pull that gold into other parts of the illustration. So you can see I put it on the tassels and I put it on the gold binding of the book. I shaded in this quill. I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to make it, what's the word? Black on the top, because I see that a lot in quills, but I decided against it. The most fun thing I think to do was these candles, because I got to do a whole lot of different colors with the line art, going from the lighter to the darker color variation, and I really like that color variation from the more traditional like waxy color to a darker purple. I think it sort of just gives the illusion that there's a light even without doing a ton of effects on top, which I do later. I do go in and add some effects on top, but I love that color variation. I shaded the candelabra with the same like metallic texture that I used for the frame. When I was shading in the mask, I found my mistake with the table, so I went back in and fixed that, and it's fine, but God, I can't believe I did that. And the final thing I did was shade in these rats. Everything else in the illustration, I changed the line art color to make it a little bit more natural. The rats, I decided to keep their black line art because I thought it made them stand out a little bit more. It made them look more like a character on the screen than another object on the screen. So I kept their black line art so that they would contrast well. You can also see that you can no longer see the overlapping line art because of the layering that I did. And even though those are all still separate pieces, you can't see it so much anymore for the animation portion. I go ahead and I went and added in this dark blue overlay, and then I carved out the light from the candles, and I added this additional light on the curtains, and also on just about everything else in the scene, the books, the mask, and the skull. So that was the final illustration. Here is it for you to see fully completed. Now we can move into part 2, the After Effects section. I don't know if this is going to be exciting to anybody. I'm not sure if people who watch art videos are usually the kind of people that watch After Effects tutorials. I guess this isn't really a tutorial, it's just showing you what I did, but I figured I might as well show you the full process of what it took to make this overlay. So I started with the tassels because I thought that was a pretty simple motion. I basically added puppet pins and used those to manipulate the swinging tassel in a more like serpentine motion than a straight back and forth. Then I tracked the tassels to that swinging rope and then added some rotation so they looked like that they were affected by gravity. And then of course I desynced them from each other just so that they wouldn't look so perfect. So here's that, the tassels, just the very simple first motion of this animation. I didn't want to go too overboard because the more you go overboard, the more parts you have to make, and that's a nightmare. The next thing I did was add in these candles. Now the candles are all on a singular layer. So basically what I did is I added a distortion, a wave warp on the candles to just give them a slight back and forth motion. And because they're all on different planes, the waves actually move them at different times. If you can picture like a wave going upwards. Things are going to move differently based on where they are placed on that wave. So basically that's what I did for the candles. And then I also wanted this like flickering of the candlelight and the shadows on top. So I basically just did an opacity effect with that, where the opacity goes from 50 to 100% in a unpredictable quote-unquote rhythm, just to make it look like the candle flickering is causing that. So that was relatively easy. The most challenging animation thing I had to do was actually both of the rats, especially the one in the mask. So I started with their tails and just did a similar thing with the puppet pinning, just having the tails go back and forth in a very like gentle motion. I did actually look up whether or not rats I looked up whether or not rats wag their tails, and they do, and it's the cutest thing on planet Earth. I don't know if you guys know this, probably not, I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I desperately want a pet rat. I desperately want 2 pet rats, actually, but I haven't been able to buy one because my dog has a really high prey drive, and I worry that she would cause an issue. Like, I love her, don't get me wrong, and I adore my dog, but she is like obsessed with my parents' cat, and she chases him all the time when we're home for the holidays and stuff like that. So it would not benefit my rats to get them just yet. So, but I've got my fingers crossed that she'll chill out a little bit in her old age and I can get a rat. So anyway, back to the stream overlay. I decided that for this rat on the right hand side, I was going to have his torso gently move up and down and have his arms go along with that, sort of swaying back and forth. His ears would wiggle, his tail would wiggle, and I also have him sort of sniffing the air with his head. So he goes like sniff, 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 and then chills out a little bit. So here's that. You can sort of see he goes up, he goes down, he goes sniff, 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 and that motion repeats itself. I love the little wiggle on his ears. I think it turned out perfectly. So I'm really thrilled with how he turned out. Now, finally, I'm working on the rat that's coming in and out of the hole in the mask. So basically, the way I did this is that the mask is technically on 2 separate layers. So the top part of the mask is in front of the rat, and the bottom part of the mask is behind the rat. So he has to go up into the top part of the mask, which causes the motion to be a little bit unnatural. I think it turned out okay, especially when I added in some lighting effects to hide him a little bit. The thing about him is that I had to track all of the pieces of his face individually. I'm sure there's a way that you can layer them where you don't have to do that. I'm just not very good at After Effects. So I had to track his whiskers and his ears while he was doing that motion. But in the end, he has his head poked out, goes back in, goes to the other side, and pokes his head out again, and you can see his whiskers twitch and his ears also move. So he's got a little bit of motion in his face. So he pops his head out, he goes back in, he pops his head out, his whiskers twitch, his ears flick, and the same thing. So I added in those like dark ellipses overlays to hide the motion of him like doing this flip around. I'm not sure it's the most natural motion in the world. It looks better coming in from the left-hand side than from the right-hand side. So to finalize this stream starting soon screen, I just added my name and the text and like a painted overlay. But that's basically it. So thank you so much for watching. I do actually stream on Twitch most Thursdays through Sundays starting at 3 p.m. So if you'd like to join me, I'm going to be debuting this stream starting soon screen today, which is Thursday. This video is coming out on Saturday, so you won't see it, but here's the final product. Thank you again so much for watching. Be sure to follow me on all my social media. I'm AfterPlague on Instagram and Twitch, and I'm after_plague on Twitter. And I hope you survive this post-plague world.